well, welcome again, everyone, to this very important panel, which we are calling Counseling and Therapy 101. I realize that I should have checked this with our resident psychologist before I said this, but I'm just going to go ahead and guess that for the purposes of this presentation, it's okay for us to be using counseling and therapy interchangeably. If those on the call happened to read the most recent decisive utterance issue, they did call to light some differences between counseling and therapy as some people understand them, but for today we're going to just use those two terms interchangeably. All of us who are participating in this event believe very strongly in the benefits of counseling for our overall wellness, but we also know, and have just been discussing before this event started, that the process of seeking counseling, of starting with a new therapist, can be scary, it can be overwhelming, it can be a little mysterious, and that's why we're excited to discuss this topic. We hope it will demystify this whole process for you and destigmatize it as well, so it doesn't feel as shameful or embarrassing to talk about going to therapy, because it's something all of us on this call have done, and we just want to share that experience with you. While we do have the Law School Counseling Center available, and we'll be providing some information about that resource during this program, the information we're going to provide is applicable to therapy both inside and outside of the law school. So we have a great panel for you here this evening. I'm Dean Pope from the Office of Student Life and Leadership, and I will be moderating. I'm excited to introduce you to Myasar Ihmud. She is currently a 2L student at UIC Law and a graduate assistant in the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is the person who suggested this topic to me last semester, and she brought this panel to fruition. So I'm very grateful for her idea and her help on this. Next, we have Professor Sonia Green. This semester, she's teaching Civ Pro 1 and 2, but she also teaches conflicts of law, international law, lawyering skills, and a class she created, I believe, which is called Assisted Reproductive Technologies and the Law. And our final panelist is Dr. Matara Wright. She holds a Doctor of Psychology degree from Adler University and currently serves as a psychologist with the Cook County Juvenile Court Clinic. While she's not a member of the law school's counseling center staff, she will be speaking from the perspective of a clinician who has conducted therapy and as a psychologist. So I would like to get us started by asking each of our panelists to just say whatever you'd like to by way of introduction, but specifically about how counseling can be helpful, how it has been helpful to you, or perhaps another way of thinking about this is why you chose to be part of this panel or accepted the invitation when I presented it to you. So I will turn this over first to Myasar, since this was your idea, and let you get us started.
Thank you, Dean Pope, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm really excited about this event, and why this panel and why I suggested this event to begin with was because for me, the reason I came to law school was because I wanted to remove barriers for people in accessing their most basic needs. Like, that was really important to me. And I think mental health services is a basic need. And I think students are a vulnerable population, right? Like, we have a lot going on. A lot of us are not currently employed. A lot of us have so many responsibilities in addition to school, and we need the support. And I would love to play my part in helping remove the barriers, which could be stigma or fear or whatever it may be in accessing those services.
Professor Green, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I personally have benefited from therapy at various stages of my life. When I was going through fertility treatment, when we had a full-term stillbirth, but then just generally as a working mom, as a lawyer, as a professor, a working mom of 4 kids who have some immune system issues. I mean, there have been a lot of times in my life where I've really felt that therapy could help me understand what I was facing better, help me find coping mechanisms. And just as a mom, and especially now that my own kids are getting to be graduating high school and one's headed off to grad school, like they're at a stage where I see times when I really feel that they could benefit from therapy as well. And that is always my advice to them. And since our student cohort, I mean, I know our cohort is all ages, but I think especially people who are students and in stressful situations, like Myasar said, I think could really benefit from it. So that's why I'm excited to be part of this. I jumped on board as soon as Dean Pope reached out.
Thank you. And Dr. Wright, I'll let you wrap up this question.
Yes, I am passionate about mental health and mental health advocacy. It's part of the reason I ended up in the field that I'm in. And what I think often people fail to consider or realize is that the mind and the body are connected. So when one isn't at its optimum level, the other suffers. So if you're struggling with a mental health issue, you tend to see changes in the body. And when there are changes in the body, you tend to see how it affects mental health. And I think we've seen this mental health boom during the pandemic, as far as people beginning to realize and appreciate how important mental health and mental health services are. However, there still is a lot of stigma surrounding mental health and mental health services. So my goal, and the reason that I decided to or agreed to participate in this panel when Dr. Pope reached out to me, is to try to provide as much information and destigmatize and demystify the therapy or counseling processes as much as possible.
Thank you so much, all of you. So Professor Green mentioned that there's been various times throughout her life that she's sought out therapy for a number of different reasons, whether it was a specific kind of an incident or just the stress that comes along with being a working professional and just life incidents. So I'd like to ask any of you who want to, but perhaps let's start with you, Myasar, with what reasons might a person have for going to counseling? And specifically at the law school, we have a law school counseling center. Do you have to talk about law school when you go to counseling?
I can definitely start with this question. I think there's so many reasons to go to therapy. For me personally, I started therapy because I was going through a really rough, interesting transition in my life. I wouldn't say a bad transition, but just a transition that was creating stress for me. I was starting law school. I had left my job. I had moved to a new area to start school, right? And so I found myself needing extra support. I've talked about a lot of different things in therapy, trouble with my family or my friendships, or not sure how to approach even speaking with my boss. It was something that was making me nervous. And even though this counseling center is attached to the law school, at least from my perspective, I haven't had to have to speak about law school, right, in therapy. I think I probably speak about law school once every few sessions, if that even. Because for me in my life, my stressors affect my performance in school. And if I can take care of those stressors, then I don't really need to worry about school. And so when I'm having difficulty kind of managing everything in school becomes stressful is when I really talk about it. But it's absolutely not something that you have to speak about if it's not something that's impacting your life.
And Dr. Wright, from a perspective of a clinician, what kinds of things do you hear people talking about in therapy?
What types of things don't I hear people talking about in therapy? But I agree with Myasar. I think there are plenty of reasons you can go to therapy or counseling. I've heard things such as relationship issues, just identity concerns and wanting to further solidify and understand one's identity, dealing with different emotions, coping with stress, family issues, relationship issues, just needing support. I think particularly with graduate students, oftentimes, especially if you've gone straight through like elementary, middle, university, and then graduate school, your identity kind of gets caught up as a student, right? And then so once you graduate, now what? You've been in school, what, 16 years? Now what? And then trying to grapple with who am I now that I'm no longer attached to this institution? I know for me, that was something I struggled with right after graduation. And I hear that oftentimes from people who are recent grads. And even the other way around. If you were working for a while and now you're going back to school, okay, I may have had a family now and things are changing. So how do I cope with these different things? So therapy, contrary to, to people's beliefs, are not just for people who have a diagnosis, even though there's nothing wrong with that either. You can go to therapy just to deal with life, because life still happens when you're in graduate school. Life still happens when you're in law school. And things happen in life that are stressful. Think about the world events and current events that are going on right now. Those things don't stop just because you're still working on a degree. And so oftentimes people need assistance and support around that. And that's what therapy or counseling services can do for you.
Do you mind if I add something to that?
No, go
Give me
ahead.
help? I think to add something to that in terms of being in grad school and how stressful it is, even though I haven't had to talk about law school as often anymore in therapy, I did a lot when I first started. It's so helpful to have a therapist who has also gone through grad school, as most of them have, because they really understand the stresses that a grad student faces in a way that my family and my friends don't, right? And in a way that my cohort or like my colleagues at school, they really understand, but we're all kind of too burnt out to talk to each other, right? And so it really helps to have this therapist who's just they're worried about you and your interests and does not worry about anyone else. It's nice to have that person in your corner.
Thanks. I feel like all of this provides a really good transition to the next question we wanted to talk about, which is, we can talk about all sorts of really personal and sensitive things, whether they're big issues or small in therapy. So it might be really important for folks to know if counseling is confidential. And from a purely like ethical, clinical perspective, I'm going to have Dr. Wright talk about that, and then I will talk specifically about the Law School Counseling Center.
Yes. So licensed mental health professionals are bound by HIPAA, just like medical health professionals. The exceptions to those things would be if the clinician suspects some type of danger, either danger to the client, the person sitting in front of us, or danger to someone else that we can identify. Those would typically be the limits to confidentiality. Now, based on what setting you're in, sometimes that's a little different. But generally, if you're receiving therapeutic services from someone like at a school or in a general clinic, those are the limits. Things are confidential unless there's a danger. And even then, the clinician still wouldn't let you know that they are getting ready to act in order to keep you or someone else safe.
Yeah, I would just second that all of that is true here. The one thing that sometimes students don't understand about our Law School Counseling Center is it's housed here, or at least pre-COVID, it was physically housed here for student convenience, but it is not actually connected to the law school or UIC in any other formal way. The clinicians are not UIC employees, they're not law school employees, they don't report to me. They are here to make it convenient for you to access services. And so not only are they held to their normal ethical standards, but their records never become part of your student record because they're owned by a completely different practice. They would be always held completely separately, except for those instances, again, where somebody was known to be in danger. And again, at that point, they probably wouldn't come to the law school. They would probably reach out to the person who could best assist in that emergency situation and not tell us at the law school, because we don't need to know that in most cases. The other question sort of about confidentiality that often comes up specifically for law students is whether you need to disclose the fact that you are in counseling to the Board of Bar Examiners when you're applying to take the exam or applying for licensure. Professor Green, I don't know if you have firsthand knowledge of this. I can say a little bit from what I've learned, but if you know something from being an attorney, feel free.
Oh, you know what? Go ahead and start, and then I'll chime in. Go ahead.
So the answer to this can vary a little bit depending on which jurisdiction you are in, but I can tell you for sure that in Illinois, our bar application no longer asks about this. They used to, is my understanding, but no more. So you do not have to disclose mental health diagnoses. Should you have one, you do not need to disclose whether you are in counseling or other kinds of treatment. What you will need to disclose are anything that results from not getting concerns treated. So if you, for example, you don't have to disclose that you are in AA. But if you don't go to AA and you drive drunk and cause an accident, that you do have to disclose. So there's actually some really good incentive in the state of Illinois, at least, to seek that help, because if that can keep you from having to engage in an issue that you do have to report, that can only be beneficial to you in the long run.
And I think that's, yeah, it's actually, so just for what it's worth. So the students on the call, I all have the pleasure and delight of claiming as my students. For those of you here, this is 100% confidential. I won't mention in class that you attended this. I mean, please know that, because some of you are my current students. So I 100% respect that. But since you are my students, and I adore you, I think it's also super cool. It's just interesting, separate from this, that there have been state differences, exactly as Dean Pope said. But the trend is very much to be getting rid of those questions. There were some, I think as of a few years ago, there were maybe 35 plus states that were still asking a question. They weren't denying people on the basis of their answer, but they were asking the question. And now the movement has been to eliminate the question completely. Also, if you're sued or if you're a plaintiff in a suit, mental health records don't come up and are protected by confidentiality unless they're actually put into issue as part of the proceedings. So like if you sue somebody for intentional infliction of emotional distress, they might ask the plaintiff to share any records of counseling they have, but it is always limited by the very, very strong protection that exists. So, but I just realized something to just think about and keep fighting for. So, yeah, I know, but and I mean, Charlie will appreciate this, just therapy about Manchester United's performance this weekend, but that's just a very limited soccer comment from me.
Thank you for adding that additional perspective. But go right ahead, Myasar.
Sorry, Dean Pope, I know my name wasn't on the list of people to answer this question, but it's something you said about how if you don't get the help you need now, you may be forced to disclose something later on because it's gotten worse. On the flip side of that, I think a good thing that you could do, like if someone gets help now and you find out that you may need some accommodations as a result of issues that you're going through now, the counseling center can definitely help in getting you evaluated, figuring out if you have a diagnosis that requires some accommodations on the bar exam, and then you can be able to disclose that to get support so that you are setting yourself up for success later on, right? So that's just something that came to me right now that I just remembered.
Thanks, that's another very good point. So let's move on and say somebody has determined they do want to seek out counseling and they don't know where to start, but they know they want to have a good fit with their counselor, their therapist. And we know that's a very important part of this process, is having somebody you connect with. What are some of the things that you might want to look for in having a counselor who's a good fit? And I'll let anybody who wants to start go with this one.
I can start with this one if that's okay. When I was first seeking therapy with the counseling center, luckily I already I've been in counseling before, and so I had some sense of what it was that I was looking for. But in my initial email straight to the intake person, I was like, I want to be paired up with a woman of color who has worked with women of color before, who have experienced trauma, right? Like I very explicitly wanted to identify with my therapist. Now, that's not something that everyone wants. Some people I know, some men, for example, don't feel comfortable speaking with another male therapist, and so they specifically want to speak with a woman, or the flip, right? Maybe age is a consideration, and you want someone who's younger versus someone who's older. And I think I really encourage people to kind of take a moment to think about who you feel comfortable speaking with, and then trying to match your, asking the clinic to match you up with someone who, if they can match you up with someone who has those similar shared identities, that could be, if that's important to you, that's something to look for in a clinician. I also have a background in social work, and so my approach to therapy and counseling is more like holistic rather than clinical, and talking about diagnostics. And so it's important for me to look for a therapist who has an LCSW versus a Psyd. Not that it's a make or break, but something to keep in mind. And while my therapist is not a licensed clinical social worker, she does talk a lot about diagnostics and talks in clinical terms, which is not something that I love for myself. And in my therapy journey, I've definitely talked to her and said, hey, I don't like how you use diagnosis and treatment when talking about my issues, right? So can we adjust the language a little bit? And it's definitely something that she's been open to, and we've talked about every now and then as it comes up throughout therapy. So I really want to encourage people to kind of not be afraid to ask for what you want, because this is ultimately for you.
And I love really quickly that you also touched on, you can say, this isn't working for me. So can we tweak this? But go ahead, Dr. Wright.
Yes, absolutely. I was just going to add on to what has already been said. I think of finding a therapist, the way I describe it, it's like looking for a nice pair of jeans. It's all about the fit, right? So just because, let's say your best friend has gone to Dr. So-and-so or Mr. or Ms. So-and-so, right? And they're like, this therapist is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of another another metaphor. But just because that person was a great fit for your friend, doesn't mean that person's going to be a great fit for you. It doesn't mean you're doing therapy wrong. It just means that's not the best fit. And so I agree. If you're able to think about who you think you would be most comfortable talking to. Are you more comfortable talking to a man or a woman? Do you want somebody that's similar to you in demographics, somebody that's different? Does it not matter? Is it more so the person's approach to you in therapy? Some people like people that are more, I don't want to say aggressive, but a bit more assertive in their therapeutic approach. Other people like to kind of sit there and think through it and feel like the person is giving them more of the reins in therapy. And the therapy is yours, so you should be in the driver's seat regardless. However, the different theoretical orientations or the different school of thoughts kind of drive how the therapist presents and provides therapeutic services. And that's also intertwined with who that person is as an individual. So if someone tells you that they are cognitive behavioral therapy oriented, their approach at cognitive behavioral therapy may be very different from the next person's. And so that's why it's all about fit. And you can ask questions like that at the beginning. What's your theoretical orientation, or what's your approach to therapy? You can ask questions like that. And if you determine early on that you don't like how the therapist is engaging with you, you can choose to leave and go somewhere else, or you can choose to just make that known and see if it's something that you can work through in therapy.
Great, thank you. So our last question in this section is, what can you expect in your first counseling session? And maybe just like we've been talking about, some of that will be feeling each other out and seeing how you fit, but what usually happens in that first session?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, no, please.
All three of us.
Dr. Wright, how about you start, and then we'll go to Professor Green since we haven't heard you for a while, and then we'll end with Myasar.
Yeah, so the first session, actually the first couple of sessions usually, are that getting to know you phase. Some clinicians will do like a pre-screen, which is where you have the opportunity to call ahead of your first scheduled appointment. and kind of talk about why you're interested in coming to therapy or what brought you to therapy. And you can use that time for the therapist to know if they're the best person to help you with what you're requesting services for. And it gives you a bit of some time to get a sense of, is this somebody that I want to be spending at least an hour a week talking to, at least an hour a week, right? So even once you get into that first session, it's usually a lot of getting to know you, the therapist telling you how they navigate therapy or treatment. They also may be getting a lot of background information from you to begin to conceptualize. And when I say conceptualize, begin to develop a plan for how they want to approach helping you through what led you to come to therapy services. A lot of it is building rapport. So, think of, I know we all maybe have that friend where we weren't sure if we were going to like them off rip. Like those first 30 minutes, I was like, I don't know about this person. But then after time, you got to know that person. And yeah, maybe they're not exactly like you, but y'all are a good fit. You're good friends. Sometimes that happens in therapy. And so sometimes it may take a little while just to build that relationship, but that's what the first few sessions are all about. Also, your therapist should be working with you to develop that plan to address your issues. So they shouldn't be telling you what they want you to work on. It should be more collaborative. So if you see someone that's trying to force you to work on something that you're not open to, that's one of those red flags.
I think that's exactly what I've experienced too. When I've gone with my sons, when they've have started therapy, that's been very much the experience. I think I tend to be kind of impatient and results oriented, so I sometimes feel like, okay, what have we achieved? And I just I really feel like I need to remind myself to lean into the fact that it'll take a few sessions before you see whatever progress might be or don't. But every one of them is valuable and important because you are, as Dr. Wright said, building that connection and building that rapport. So just being open and being able to answer questions and also ask questions that you may have is a really good use of that time.
And I was just going to add that it's totally normal to be nervous and anxious for your first session. And I still get nervous and anxious even now, a year and a half into therapy with my current counselor. Don't let that scare you away is just what I would have to say about that. I think the therapists in the first session expect that some people might be a little bit nervous. And so, yeah.
I think that's a really fair thing to say. I mean, you're entering into this relationship, which is a new relationship potentially, but you're having the kinds of conversations potentially that you only have with people you've known for a very long time. You're talking about very vulnerable, intimate things with somebody that you barely know at the start. So that can be a very anxiety producing thing. And so that's normal. But I think keeping in mind that you're there to have them get to know you so that they can help you in whatever ways you need is a way to sort of get over some of that anxiety. And the other thing I hear a lot of students saying, and felt this for myself during the pandemic, is it also can feel very weird at first to be talking about very sensitive personal topics on Zoom, because we don't do that. We don't do that often. We have class on Zoom, or we go to presentations like this on Zoom, but we don't tend to have these intimate conversations on Zoom. I will say for me that awkwardness passed pretty quickly, and now it's just the way things are. So keep that in mind, that's normal as well. So we're going to move into sort of a, maybe we could call it a lightning round. I don't know, but we've collected a number of comments that each of us has heard from students or others who are saying, this is why I don't go to therapy. And we just wanted to raise those and see how folks on the panel respond. If any of you in the audience feel like you hear yourself, that might be an interesting thing to trigger you to listen a little bit more carefully to that answer. Or if you have thoughts as well, feel free to put them in the chat if you're comfortable with that. And anybody at all can jump in on these. So the first comment is, I'm too busy with school and I don't have time for therapy.
I can put myself out there. That was definitely that was a thought I had while I was in graduate school. Shame on me, right? But yes, that was definitely a thought I had. And I did end up finally having my own therapist as I neared the end of graduate training, just because it was a lot. It was a lot.
And if you're, you know, if you're worried about impact on your schoolwork and you feel like I can't take a break from reading cases, I cannot emphasize more strongly what you know, Dean Pope already said, and what Dr. Wright said, and what Myasar said. You know, it's the time you put into therapy is going to pay dividends in terms of your ability to concentrate, focus. So just think of it as part of my getting ready. Part of me being a good student is taking care of the mental health, you know, issues that I might have, you know, trying to improve that, because it really will help you with your focus in your schoolwork. You do have the time.
We were talking briefly before we started too about the fact that just reading cases or working in a clinic or whatever your current life as a student entails often involves dealing with really difficult stuff. You're reading cases that can be pretty traumatic, that can raise issues that are very uncomfortable. And in order to engage with that material as thoroughly as you might need to, it might be really helpful to have somebody to talk to about all of these things and what it raises for you. So the next statement was, I don't see how talking is going to solve anything.
Well, it's not going to solve it. It's not going to necessarily solve anything, but it will help. It will help so much. And I think that's, you know, and there's so much value in that. You know, I'd kind of say, yeah, and even if it doesn't, it's still incredibly valuable. I have only ever had it help me. I've seen it with friends, with my kids, with my family members. So even if it doesn't solve something, it's still worthwhile. And if it does solve something, great.
And I would add that therapy is so much more than just talking. There's a lot of therapists really, or at least my therapist has really helped me develop coping mechanisms, helping put boundaries in place, practicing all sorts of things. More often than not, I'm left with a homework assignment at the end of each session to maybe try journaling, try going on a walk, and then we'll come back and talk about it, right? It seems like these are really simple, tiny things, but when you are overwhelmed and have so much going on, you really need that space to kind of just let it out. And therapists are trained to find the themes and all of the things in your life that are stressing you out and like help bring them to the surface and help you see them. It's like it unravels things for you, and it's like seeing it's almost like having a sounding board for your life. It's really, I think it's more than just you talking, but also having to help someone listen and hear you is also incredibly validating too.
Okay, next one, but if you have something else to add, feel free on that one. If I talk about everything that's going on in my life, I will start to cry and I won't be able to stop, and then I won't be able to finish my semester or take my exams or focus on my reading. Fill in the blank. Any comments on that one?
There's nothing wrong with crying. Crying actually has health benefits for us as human beings. But in the moment, right? Everyone's like, oh, if I start crying in front of this therapist, they're gonna think I'm so odd. No, it's okay to cry. And if you're worried about once you start crying, you won't be able to contain it in the future, the therapist is there to be able to help you develop the coping skills that you need to be able to better regulate and manage emotions during stressful and difficult times, as well as to help you identify healthy outlets for emotions, which includes crying, but also being able to manage that in different spaces.
Okay, and our final one is, I can just talk to my friends or my family. I don't need to talk with a therapist. I see Myasar making a face because I feel like she's already addressed this a little bit, but maybe you can get us started.
I feel like
There's
I'm
a
talking a
comment
lot.
in the chat that just says no.
Honestly, I think it's so much different than talking to friends and family. I think friends and family have an agenda, not necessarily a bad one, but they have a stake in whatever it is that's going on in your life. And a therapist is only there for you, in your corner, worried about your interests. And that makes such a huge difference when someone is only worried about you versus trying to get you to think about family responsibilities, or maybe you're feeling some type of way about your family member and you don't want to make them feel bad, or you don't know how to approach that conversation. And talking to family and friends is incredibly helpful, and the therapist, I think, can help you figure out how to talk to families and to your family and friends in a healthy way that will benefit you.
I think that's absolutely right. I don't think it's either or, but I think that therapy has a unique purpose that can't really be achieved with even the most supportive friends and the most loving family. That's, it's still it won't necessarily achieve the same purpose talking to these people as therapy will.
I agree. I think, family and friends, if those are individuals that you feel you can go to and trust with issues, that's great. However, it's very different from therapy when the therapist is focused on you and helping you to meet whatever your goal was, or is. Also, everybody doesn't have family and friends that they feel comfortable to go to with certain things. So not only sometimes do you disclose things in therapy that you would only disclose to family and friends, but sometimes things get disclosed in therapy that you as the client have not disclosed to anyone. And so I think that comes from the relationship that has been built with the therapist and that sacred space that's considered the therapeutic relationship, and speaks to how that is so different from interacting with family and friends.
Thank you all so much. All very valuable insights. So I'm going to give our panelists a short break while I answer some specific questions about the Law School Counseling Center. And at the end of this section, I will make sure to put in the chat the contact information for the Counseling Center. But the first question that I often hear is, what will happen when I reach out to schedule an appointment? So as I mentioned briefly earlier, the Law School Counseling Center is run by Empowered Therapy, which is a private counseling practice in Chicago. They are not UIC employees. You're not calling a UIC phone number or emailing even a UIC email address. So when you reach out by either email or phone, the Empowered Intake Coordinator will contact you back with some basic questions about your schedule, the main issues you'd like to discuss, any preferences you have for a therapist, the exact kinds of things that we've been talking about. Do you have a language that you'd like to do therapy in? Is it important to you to have a clinician of a certain race or gender or ethnicity or background, etc.? And your insurance information. I will just point out that even though all four of us on this panel today are women, we do have male students in counseling and we have male clinicians as well. So if that's something that's important to you, do keep that in mind. Empowered does have a diverse staff of clinicians. So all of this information that you provide will be used to connect you with a therapist who they think has the best chance of meeting your needs. But again, as we've discussed, that can be something that you continually work on with your therapist. And if it is not a good fit, please let somebody know and they will absolutely work to get you connected with somebody else who might be a better fit. So this leads me into my second question, which is, how much does counseling cost? Since the Law School Counseling Center is a recognized service of UIC law, your first 3 counseling sessions are covered free of charge. This is a part of the student health services fee, which you already pay to UIC by virtue of being a student. There is really no reason not to explore counseling, even if all you do is go for those first 3 sessions, because it's completely free, no cost, no additional paperwork or expenses or anything. And you can use those 3 sessions to determine if counseling is something you want to keep going at, or find other wellness resources that work better for you. After those first 3 sessions, you will be able to transfer to paying by insurance. Part of what the intake process does is make sure that you're with somebody who will be able to keep seeing you once you switch to insurance. The Law School Counseling Center, again, offered by Empowered, does accept UIC campus care insurance. They also accept some other private insurance plans. And in those cases, you'll only pay the copay that's required by your insurance company. Sometimes that's $10 or $20 if you're not familiar with how a copay works. You should be able to find that in your explanation of benefits. In the event that you don't have insurance that Empowered accepts, or maybe you're on Medicaid, or maybe you're on your parents' insurance and you really don't want them to see that you're billing counseling to their insurance, or there's some other reason that you need to explore other payment options, they can absolutely work with you on a sliding scale cash pay system or other kinds of options. So don't let payment or insurance status keep you from reaching out. And then finally, students often tell me that they aren't reaching out for counseling services because they've heard that there's a long wait list. So why should they do it anyway? Is this true or not? Well, it's a little bit of both. We are in a very enviable position at UIC in that we have our own counseling center at the law school. We got grandfathered in when we were acquired by UIC, and we got to keep our own center. That means that you do not have to go to the main UIC counseling center that does have very long wait times. Unfortunately, that's just a very normal thing in college counseling centers. They have so much interest and not enough counselors. So that is not a negative on UIC's part, it's just a reality of college counseling centers. But we're in the very lucky position of having a completely separate system that our students get to utilize. And we do not have that kind of a wait list. I do believe right now we have a very short wait list of maybe 5 students, which could delay your seeing a counselor by maybe 2 weeks. So it's a little bit of a wait. If it is a true emergency and you need to see somebody right away, somebody can help you assess whether calling 911 and getting emergency treatment is the most helpful, or in some cases we can get you in for a triage appointment just to see what kind of services you need. But it is even at the worst case scenario, a very short wait list. But even so, there are some things that Empowered is doing to address this. They are currently hiring new counselors specifically for the law school. So they're regularly expanding their availability. And the other good thing about this is, I will say, everybody who is assigned to work with law students has some additional expertise in what law student life is like. They meet as a team regularly. They talk with me regularly, not about who's seeing them as for therapy at all. That I do not know that information, but I get to tell them like what's going on at the law school that might be presenting as issues in therapy. What are some, everybody on the call will know what I mean when I say that LS3 Herzog competition raises everybody's stress level. So they know when the Herzog competition is coming up and when those briefs are due, so that they can expect we might get these kinds of questions. So they understand a little bit more about what your life as a law student is. For the foreseeable future, therapy offered through the Law School Counseling Center is offered online, which actually frees up some additional time for appointments. You don't have to, and they don't have to build in travel time to get to appointments. So that allows for a few more appointments. And I'll just say that the more availability you can offer up, the more likely they are to be able to get you in quickly. So Empowered counselors do have appointments available. It's not that they have no slots available, but if you go to them and say the only time I can see somebody is, for example, Tuesday at 3 p.m., they may have all their Tuesday 3 p.m. slots booked. But if you can give them any other options, they're more likely to be able to fit you in more quickly. And then finally, do remember that even if there is a short waiting list, the sooner you get on that waiting list, the sooner you can get off the waiting list. So there's no harm in putting yourself on the waiting list right now, so that you can get in to see a counselor as soon as possible. So I think I'm going to start to wrap us up. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I'll turn it over to our panelists to say anything else you'd like to say. What I had planned as sort of our closing question was any parting words of advice, maybe specifically about why you encourage people to explore therapy, although I feel like we've talked about that a little bit, how you've benefited from therapy yourself, or anything else that you think is important for law students to know about supporting their own mental health. And while you do that, I'm going to put the contact information for the counseling center in the
I can start with the parting words of advice and how therapy has benefited me personally. In the last year and a half, I've gone through quite a bit of stuff. Life has been complicated, I think, for a lot of different people, for a lot of us. But through therapy, I've been able to really improve, I think, my interpersonal skills with other folks by doing group therapy. I've been able to access medication, which I really needed, but didn't know that I needed. And my therapist was very patient with me until she was not, and was like, you really need to start medication. And so I did. And now I will say that that's been a huge benefit for me. I've also been needing some assistance with making appointments in terms of my own physical health, not just my mental health. And that was something that was stressing me out. My therapist was able to help me with that as well. You know, screen sharing and like, this is the phone number you need to call to make, you know, to get yourself an appointment, right? Like really helping me break down the things that I need that were really stressing me out, and being able to support me in that way. My final piece of advice, I think, for everyone is that I really view mental health almost akin to physical health. I think if you have a sprained ankle and you keep walking on it, it will get worse, right? If you're having issues with depression, with anxiety, with stress, and you think, oh, it'll be fine. Once I hit spring break, it'll be gone. Once the summer starts, it'll be okay. Well, that's not the case necessarily. The more you tax your mental health and try to push through the depression, push through the anxiety, it's going to get worse, to be honest. And my advice would be to not wait until you absolutely need support to get it. Having those support systems in place now ensures that they're more effective when you need them later on.
I want to add too that there is just no stigma to it. I'm heartened to see that, you know, many people now will just view it as, you know, and I think what Dr. Wright said about mental health and physical health, you know, being very much intertwined, and what Myasar just said about, you know, how you have to kind of think of it almost the same way. It could get worse, but I think that we're having more and more conversations about the importance of it. You know, it's great to see people speaking out, people being open, you know, athletes speaking out about mental health concerns. But in law school, I think sometimes we still tend toward stigmatizing it and pretending everything is okay and pretending we're stronger than we are. And there's just no need for that. Many of us, you know, students, faculty, you know, staff, have gone through or are going through mental health issues, and it's okay to admit that, and it's okay to seek help for it. And you know, just please know that you're supported, and there really shouldn't be any stigmas around it at all. In fact, I mean, I think kudos to anybody who is seeking it out and is thinking about their own mental health.
Yes, just to reiterate everything that's been stated and what I started off stating at the beginning of the panel, mental health is health, right? When we think about medical doctors, if you hurt yourself or you get a cut or you break a bone, nobody says anything about going to a medical doctor, right? Same thing with the stresses that affect our mental states and our mental health. It's the same thing. There are individuals that are there to provide support and treatment regarding mental health stressors, and things of that nature. So why not seek that assistance and that help? And if you have a school that provides those opportunities, and I'm big on, if I already paid for something, I'm gonna use it. You're already paying for it. If nothing else, use those first 3 sessions, right? Because over time, or when you don't have something you already paid for, mental health services can get pricey if you don't already have things in place. Another thing, just as because I do forensic work as well, I see attorneys, especially in criminal law, who do begin to struggle with some of the traumas and things they get exposed to in their day-to-day lives just doing their work. So why not go ahead and set yourself up to be successful and to have those supports in place if you are planning on going into the legal field?
Well, thank you all so much. Thanks to those of you who came and provided helpful comments in the chat and encouragement to your classmates. I am going to take, we'll take some time for questions. If you want to put them in the chat, we've got a few minutes left, or after we shut off the recording, you're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask them there if you'd like. But I'm just so thankful for our panelists, for their vulnerability, for their willingness to talk and share, and for all of you who came out and are helping us change our culture in the law school to make this a priority for all of us. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a really great evening. I will end the recording now.